Hello, welcome back to this second part of Chapter 6. And so we were talking about the cloud, and so with this slide we'll talk about using web services. This is an internal graphic of that, and so this company has their own servers locally, and they're doing some inventory applications on those servers. Those servers are then connected to a database server, and this is all housed in a local company. But the web services then is the portion of how do we access all of this information. We're not going to run an application on our computer. We're going to actually access all this through our browsers. And so you might have a browser in the sales department and a browser in the shipping department, and they can get to these inventory applications through a browser and then access this data that's sitting here. Same thing for customer service, same thing for accounting. So everybody is making use of web services in order to get to this information. The idea is that people are used to using a browser, and so if they can access this application that interfaces through a browser, it's going to be easier for them to use and understand and know what they need to do instead of figuring out a different interface on a different application each time. So to answer question 3 is, how can then the Falcon Security Company use the cloud? So some software as a service products that they could use Google Mail. And within Google Mail, you also have Google Calendar, and that can be shared among the employees. They could store their data on Google Drive and make it password protected for certain people to get into, and then have certain areas that only company employees could get into. They could use the cloud to run Office 365 on, and so then people could access all of the Office applications through the internet, through a web again. They could do a CRM application through Salesforce.com, or they could use the Microsoft CRM online. And so just to give you an idea of what can be done in the cloud and how it might be able to save the company money in terms of they're not going to have to set up all of these applications and maintain them. The company that's selling you this is doing that, and so when there's updates to be done, they'll go ahead and do those. You're getting the latest in Office products. You're not going to have to install any security updates. All that's going to be done on those remote servers that you're accessing through the web. And here's some examples of platform as a service and the different companies that offer that. So here's the Amazon Relational Database. They support these following databases: MySQL, Oracle, SQL Server, which is Microsoft, PostgreSQL, I think it's open source, and some others. And so the idea is that if Falcon were going to be able to lease their hardware and operating system, they would be looking for something that would provide them these sort of databases or backends that they could store their applications on. Now they could write their own applications, or they could lease those applications from different vendors as well. As you can see here, if they're distributed like this, they could use Content Delivery Network to distribute their own content, and then also put in the ads in that content that they're distributing to generate even more business around the world. The next thing you probably need to know about is this infrastructure as a service. And so that infrastructure is think about what it is that you've got to have in terms of hardware and software in order to run your business. So you've got your basic hardware in the cloud. You may need to do different operating systems, and so those operating systems may run on different types of servers. And in order to do that, you're going to need lots of technical expertise and management, something that you may not be able to afford internally because you may not have enough for them to do or just can't afford it. But if you can lease that or get that expertise from a vendor that's providing you cloud access, then you're probably going to come out ahead of where you would if you had to purchase that locally. Then by using the cloud, especially this infrastructure as a service, Falcon could be able to use some elastic data storage services. So as the data needs go up, they can just say, hey, I want to purchase X amount of space, and automatically that's added, and now they can start saving their data in that new space. So along with the infrastructure as a service, software as a service, and the platform as a service, they're all going to provide lots of value to Falcon Security. The next thing I want to talk about is how can organizations use cloud services securely. And so typically what you will do is you'll create a VPN or virtual private network from one destination to another over the internet. And so that VPN then provides you your only connection from your client to your server, and it's secure or encrypted. And so once that goes away, then that channel goes away. Others from the outside on the internet cannot get to it. And so that's the process of doing that. I know for myself, if I'm doing any kind of banking, say from home or the office, I'll use a virtual private network and I'll connect to the bank. And so that way it's a little bit more secure than connecting directly to them. Sometimes banks and other financial institutions will provide you a connection that is a VPN and you may not even know it. But it's something you have to think about and make sure that when you're looking into cloud computing, it's going to be available to you and that the cloud vendor has that technology. Now the VPN that I use is called TunnelBear, and so it's an extension into the browser. And so if I want to have any kind of browsing that's secure, I will turn TunnelBear on, and then when I go and connect to some other resource, I have a virtual private network connected. So here we have a graphic representation of the process. And so typically you have the remote client connects to the server. That's going to establish a VPN. The message is going to be encrypted, and there's also going to be an IP address or internet protocol address that gets sent to this other site. And so when it hits the server then will strip off the internet address. It will decrypt the message and go ahead and then send it to whatever machine it needs to that's inside this network that you've connected to. So then what a cloud vendor might do for you is allow you to create a private cloud. And so again, with the private cloud, they're going to host this web server, they're going to host this database server here, they're going to have some kind of front-end computer that balances the load between all these other clients that are coming in to use this service. As a manager, you don't need to worry about this unless it becomes a problem and then one server gets overworked and the cloud vendor hasn't really done their job. So you need to make sure before you sign those contracts of just how good that vendor is and how proficient they are at knowing how to balance their load for their different servers, and that they can offer you a private cloud where only you and the people you give access to can access this information. The vendor could also give you a virtual private cloud, and that would allow you to store some of your less sensitive data in the cloud, and then any sensitive data or required data that you need to store locally, you're going to have to provide your own infrastructure for. And when I say infrastructure, it means the hardware, the software, any kind of applications that need to run locally. So what does cloud mean to you? What can it do for your business? It means that you're probably going to get faster services. It's going to be more secure and easier to use, and hopefully the reason why you would want to switch is because it's going to be cheaper. And so you see a lot of companies are moving that way, and they don't want to do their own computing infrastructure. They just soon move it to the cloud. And so, for my department, if we realize that, do we still need to be turning out lots of individual people that can set up networks and manage all that infrastructure? Or is it just going to be a few companies out there that are going to handle that for a bunch of different companies? And we believe that's the way the future is going to be. It's going to be a small number of companies that are going to do that for a bunch of other companies. That is, they're going to provide all of the cloud services for all the other companies. And so that means they're going to be able to pool those servers, from a bunch of different organizations. And so then the cloud is going to get bigger and bigger. They're going to have to manage more and have more balancing amongst those different servers that they're using for each individual organization. But the nice thing would be is that, as you need more processing power, you can automatically get it. You don't have to go through some kind of process of having to order the device, install the device, set it up, make sure it's working with the other devices. You just check a button and it'll automatically be done for you when you're using the cloud. And so hopefully it's going to be much faster than the old ways of doing things. And so some things that you're seeing that makes all this possible, like telediagnosis, telesurgery, telelaw enforcement, and so on, are having all that information and that data in the cloud. And so people can then access that data and use it in different remote locations. And so if there's a place where it's very dangerous, you could access that information and use the data there or whatever applications you have. Now, sometimes this might be done with, say, robotics. And so, but you could put that robot anywhere. They could access that data and then go ahead and do what they need to do. The next thing I want to discuss is a sidebar in your book, but it's something that's probably going to come about again when the federal government discusses it some more. Currently we have net neutrality, it's enabled, and so you need to understand that the internet service providers have little control over the amount, the type, and origin of content that is being sent over the internet. Now they would like to have more control, they'd like to tax it, and they'd like to be able to charge different companies different rates depending on how much data they want to send. And so, for example, you see here that 30% of the U.S. internet traffic during peak hours comes from people using Netflix. So you can see how the bandwidth gets all used up by people streaming videos through Netflix, and then if that gets too much, then it slows down, and then you get these little lags or hesitations in the videos you're watching. So if the companies, these internet service providers, if they could charge Netflix more for using all of their bandwidth, they would. That's what they want to do. And so it may be that they'll give them high priority for sending their information because they're paying more, and that means for people that aren't paying more or paying less, that their needs over the internet would be scaled back or reduced to when they might be able to send and receive data, or would go at a much slower rate. Right? So some other things about net neutrality that we currently have is that all users and content providers are treated equally. So there's nothing that's going to be fast or slow, but we could, your internet service provider could throttle things back. And so if you were using, an example of this might be AT&T. If you were using AT&T for your data needs using your phone, when you get to a certain percentage of, say, the amount of data that you have available from month to month, AT&T may throttle the amount of data and the speed in which you can receive that data back. And so now things are coming down much slower and you can't get things as fast. And so that's what could happen to everybody. But technically, all internet service providers are not allowed to block or slow down content. Right? They can't choose to allow Netflix to stream their stuff and block Amazon. And so, or give Amazon preferential treatment over Hulu or something like that. Right? And so currently they can't charge for heavy internet users or give them taxes or try and tax them as well. That would be something the government would impose on them. And so in the future, this is going to keep coming up as an issue. The internet service providers want to be able to limit who can use their bandwidth. And so then everybody's going to have to pay more for those services that they're charging as well. And so if Netflix gets charged more, they're just going to pass those costs on to their customers. Right? So that's what we have today. And so from a federal government perspective, we have a new FCC is approved new regulations in 2015. So they render the internet as a utility. And so the problem is that the internet service providers are then saying that this is cutting back on their potential revenue that they could get. And if they're not going to get the revenue, then they may not build any more infrastructure for the internet. So let's say, instead of thinking about putting in fiber to handle all that extra demand, they're just going to stay with cable that uses copper. And that can only go so fast, whereas fiber can go much faster. But that's what they're saying if they don't get that additional revenue. And so, as you can see here with this bullet item and what I've said in the previous slide, I think the issue is just starting, and you're going to see it come back again and again. So the last thing to kind of review is how does this knowledge in this chapter about cloud computing help you? It's something that you need to be aware of, especially when you're first starting your career. You can think of different ways you might be able to help the company, save the company money. There's also going to be different types of jobs that are going to be created because of cloud computing. You're now going to have managers that oversee that interaction between the vendor and the company. And so you could also save your company a lot of money, as I mentioned, by moving things to the cloud. But you're going to need to be able to analyze that and determine, what's it going to cost for us to do everything in-house versus go ahead and put it in the cloud. You're also going to need to understand, is this data and this use of the data something that we really want in the cloud, or do we need to keep it local? And so that ends this chapter on cloud computing.